Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into the smoky warmth of a Viking longhouse where the wind howls across frozen fjords. But inside it's cozy enough to knock you out like a baby walrus in a wool blanket. We're diving into why people from Viking times, yes, those axe-swinging, horn-wearing folks, though actually not really had some of the best sleep in human history. Honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this level of comfort. If we time-traveled you into their nightly routine, you'd be snoring in 9 seconds flat. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments what city you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing at the edge of a snowy clearing in what's now rural Norway. The air smells like pine and distant sea salt. The sky is a cold navy blue, full of stars that seem etched into glass. In the middle of this quiet darkness, a longhouse sits like a sleeping beast. Thick timber walls, thatched roof heavy with frost. Inside, a low fire glows in the hearth, and you duck your head as you enter. Warmth envelops you, like you've stepped into the middle of a wool sock. Viking households weren't just rough bunkers. These were carefully designed communal homes. You'd find a central hall with raised wooden platforms lining either side, where families lay together under thick bedding. The fire pit runs right down the center, always smoldering, never completely out, so the place is warm all night, but not smoke-choked. The scent is wood, smoke, maybe a hint of herbs drying overhead. Someone's goat is snoring gently in the corner. You're already feeling sleepy, aren't you? And here's the twist. Even though life during the Viking Age was brutal plowing fields by hand, rowing through Arctic storms, and occasionally fending off raiders' sleep was not neglected. In fact, it was sacred. After sunset, there were few artificial lights, no street lamps, no phones pinging with news about distant kingdoms, just natural deep dark. That meant your body slipped easily into rest mode, melatonin flowing like mead. By the time evening rolled around, the entire household shifted into wind-down mode. Candles flickered in stone niches. Children listened to stories about Thor and giants, curled up in bundles of fur beside their parents. There was no rush to separate or isolate. Privacy didn't mean sleeping alone. It meant having a little nook, maybe a carved divider or a fur curtain. Otherwise, you were wrapped up with kin, sharing heat and safety in a dark, often dangerous world. Here's a fun detail. Vikings were really into layering. No, not just with clothing. Their bedding was layered too. Woolen blankets, fur pelts, and sometimes feather-stuffed pillows if you were fancy. Animal hides made the perfect bottom layer, insulating against the cold seeping up through wooden planks. You lay down, the fire crackling softly, your body sore from a day of actual physical labor, your belly full of stew and barley bread, and your eyes heavy. Sounds like the ultimate sleep setup, right? Scholars debate just how much of this coziness was universal. Some argue that poorer families had fewer comforts, maybe sleeping on straw mats or simple animal skins. Others suggest that even the most humble Viking homestead prioritized warmth and comfort at night, because surviving the Nordic winter without it wasn't exactly optional. What's less contested is that their communal sleep culture led to longer, deeper rest. Hours and hours of uninterrupted snoozing in a society where night wasn't a throwaway time, but a meaningful pause. And don't forget the sounds. There's no traffic, no plumbing, no humming refrigerators, just the occasional creak of timber, maybe the wind rattling the eaves, the low breath of livestock tucked in nearby. In fact, many Viking homes shared walls or spaces with animals, not because they were weird about goats, but because those body temperatures helped heat the building. So yeah, that goat snoring in the corner, he's basically your space heater. But what really ties this whole picture together is the sense of rhythm. Viking life moved with the sun and seasons. Daylight was for work, and darkness was for sleep or story or singing or dreaming. You weren't expected to be productive at midnight or respond to a torch-lit raven scroll about the next village's barley yields. Night was sacred, and the longhouse was a place of warmth and dreams. You find your place along one of the raised platforms, maybe next to a fur-wrapped old woman telling a tale about sea spirits or a warrior snoring like thunder. You pull a blanket over your chest, listen to the hiss of an ember collapsing, and close your eyes. This is how it began, the Viking night. Not a time of stress, but a time of recovery, communion, and comfort. In the next section, we'll zoom in a little more to see how the bedroom itself was set up. Because yes, these people knew how to build a sleep nook that would make Pinterest weak. The Viking longhouse doesn't just feel cozy, it's engineered for it. Tonight, as the fire glows and your breath forms soft clouds in the cooler corners of the room, let's take a closer look at the layout of where all this peaceful slumber actually went down. Because while modern homes obsess over walk-in closets and bathroom tile, back then, what really mattered was how you built a sleeping space that didn't let the cold kill you by morning. You shuffle quietly across the wooden planks, passing the hearth, where the fire's still whispering warmth into the air. On either side of the central aisle, there are long raised platforms, benches by day, beds by night. These aren't separate bedrooms. There are no walls, no locked doors, or do not disturb signs. It's one shared chamber, and sleep is a communal ritual. The platforms are built up just high enough to avoid drafts, but not so high you lose heat. Clever, right? Most households use these raised sleeping platforms as shared family beds. One side of the longhouse might house the main family group, parents, children, maybe a grandparent or two, and the opposite side could be for hired hands, visiting kin, or yes, the occasional livestock needing to ride out a harsh frost. Each section might be demarcated by carved beams or suspended cloth, kind of like a privacy curtain, but make it Viking chic. The message is clear. This is a society where sleeping together wasn't strange or uncomfortable. It was survival. It was community. Evenings began with bedding prep. You'd lay out heavy woolen blankets, thick, scratchy, and naturally insulating. Then came the pelts, bear, fox, elk, maybe sheep if you were lucky. Some homes even had feather-stuffed pads, primitive pillows, and mattresses that gave a surprising amount of cushion. Archaeologists have found fragments of bird feathers used for stuffing, which isn't just bougie, it's brilliant. If you've ever been under a good feather duvet, you know that stuff can trap heat like it's hoarding it for winter. Lighting was soft and low. Instead of harsh lamps, you had animal fat candles or oil lamps made of soapstone, giving off a gentle flicker, just enough glow to see the outline of your kin beside you or trace the wooden carvings above your bed. Often symbols of protection, fertility, or animals. Some were shaped like serpents, dragons, or ravens watching from the beams above. Not creepy at all. Totally relaxing, right? The sleeping platforms weren't just functional, they were symbolic too. Sleeping higher off the ground signaled a little status. If you were the head of the household or a respected elder, you got the warmest, highest spot closest to the fire. Children might curl up toward the outer edges, often surrounded by adults like a warm human donut. And the further you were from the hearth, the closer you were to the chilly timber walls. So let's just say you really wanted to be on Grandpa's good side come winter. And there were little personal touches, too. You might keep a carved wooden box at your feet full of combs, personal tokens, maybe even a bit of jewelry. Some people hung charms above their sleeping space, Thor's hammer for protection, a sun wheel for good dreams. There's one recovered amulet in Sweden that scholars believe was designed to ward off nightmares. Basically a Viking dream catcher if you think bulked. Fringe fact for the win. It's around this time you realize how seamlessly the space shifts from day to night. In daylight, these platforms hold tools, baskets, maybe someone weaving or sharpening a blade. But by sundown, they're transformed into beds. The fire is banked. Everyone piles under their respective blankets, and the room goes quiet, save for the occasional mutter of dreams or the sigh of logs settling in the fire. Now, let's talk about ventilation. You'd think with this many people and animals breathing the same air in one giant room, it would feel stuffy. But Viking builders knew how to work airflow. Roof vents and small openings near the gables helped smoke escape while retaining warmth. Chimneys weren't a Viking thing yet, but longhouses had narrow slits that let out just enough smoke so no one suffocated, but not so much that all the heat vanished. If you've ever been in a smoke sauna or an old log cabin, you'll know that balance is everything. Still, not everyone agrees on how smoky it really got. Some scholars argue that longhouse air would have been borderline unbreathable by modern standards, especially in the dead of winter when all vents were shut tight. Others point out that Viking lungs were probably tougher than ours, and that the high ceilings and clever design kept most of the smoke above nose level. Either way, it's a far cry from the sterile white bedroom of today, but arguably more restful. No blue light, no notifications, just flickering amber shadows and the slow rhythm of communal breathing. One last detail, these weren't random piles of blankets on a floor. The wooden platforms often had raised edges like shallow boxes to keep bedding in place. Because when you're sleeping with 3 kids, a hunting dog, and your cousin who snores like Thor's hammer on granite, you don't want your pelt sliding onto the cold floorboards in the middle of the night. You lie back on one now, fur tucked under your chin, and you realize this is probably the deepest sense of comfort you've ever known. It's not about silence or luxury. It's about warmth, proximity, rhythm, and tradition. A space that changes with the seasons, protects your body, and links you to your ancestors. Quite literally, as some households kept inherited bedding materials for generations. As your eyes close, you wonder, how did modern people mess this up so badly? But hold that thought. In the next section, we'll zoom in even closer onto the actual materials themselves. Because believe it or not, those Viking blankets might be cozier than anything you've got on your bed right now. You tug the blanket closer around your shoulders, and it's not some mass-produced cotton poly blend. It's dense wool, woven tight, still carrying the earthy scent of lanolin. That's sheep oil, by the way. And yeah, it's a little funky, but it's also what makes the blanket water resistant and perfectly insulating. Tonight, we're diving into the materials that made Viking bedding a legitimate sleep flex. Because let's be real, if you had to survive Scandinavian winters without central heating, you'd want every pelt, feather, and thread nature could offer too. First off, wool was the MVP. Vikings had sheep all over the place. Scruffy, hardy breeds that could handle the cold, and whose wool was thick enough to make a sail or a sleeping bag, depending on how you spun it. Women in the household would spend hours spinning and weaving this wool into heavy blankets, not the soft, light ones we're used to today. These were thick slabs of fabric, almost carpet-like, designed to trap heat and last through years of wear. By the time night fell, each family member had at least one of these weighty, comforting covers wrapped around them. And the heaviness. That's not just for warmth. These things had the same calming effect as today's weighted blankets, grounding your body and helping it settle into stillness. The Vikings might not have had the vocabulary for deep pressure stimulation, but their sleep setup nailed it. Then came the furs, and not just for luxury. Though yes, snuggling into a silver fox pelt is as extra then as it is now. Fur was layered over or under wool, depending on the season. Bearskins were prized for their sheer size and insulating properties, but you'd also see elk, reindeer, and wolf fur used in colder regions. The hair side always faced in, pressing against your body and creating an additional heat trap. People even made fur sleeping sacks, primitive sleeping bags really, stitched from multiple hides lined with wool or feathers. If you were rich, your winter sleep looked like a mashup of nature's best. Wool against the base, fur on top, feathers at your head, and possibly even another person or dog nearby to add extra warmth. Speaking of feathers, let's talk about pillows. While not every Viking slept with one, the ones who did took it seriously. Archaeological finds from grave sites in Scandinavia have included remnants of feather-filled cushions, often made from the softer down of ducks and geese. These weren't mass-produced, obviously. Each one would be hand-stitched, carefully filled, and probably considered something of a household treasure. Some theories suggest these pillows were passed down, and there's even evidence that feather bedding was included in dowries. Here's my daughter, and also the comfiest nap accessory in the fjords. Now, don't think every Viking bed was a fluffy dreamscape. Some households, especially in poorer settlements, may have done with straw or hay-stuffed bedding. That might sound itchy, but they'd layer it with wool cloth or sheepskin to make it bearable. It wasn't glamorous, but it worked. And in a pinch, even dried moss was used as a mattress filler. Practical, biodegradable, and probably a bit squeaky. If that's not eco-chic, what is? One of the most curious fringe facts: Viking beds might have smelled amazing. Not like department store amazing, but clean, earthy, maybe even herbal. That's because people sometimes stuffed bedding with sweet-smelling herbs like juniper, thyme, or yarrow. Partly to repel lice and other pests, and partly because, hey, who doesn't want to fall asleep to the scent of a forest spa? Bedding might also be smoked over the hearth to dry it out and give it a lingering woodsy aroma. You're drifting off now just thinking about it, aren't you? And let's not forget the textiles that made it all possible. Women, yes, mostly women, were textile powerhouses in Norse culture. Weaving was serious business done on massive upright looms in the home. It took weeks to make a single blanket. The woven fabric wasn't just for personal use either. It was valuable trade currency. In fact, woven wool cloth was so precious that it became a form of money in Icelandic law. Measured in ells, which were basically Viking fabric credits. Your bedspread could literally be worth more than your sword. Not to say that Vikings had a bedtime economy, but they kind of did. Of course, there's scholarly debate about how widespread the feather-stuffed comfort really was. Some argue that most people, especially those not of noble status, probably slept on simpler hay-stuffed bedding with minimal furs. Others say that even poorer families prioritized comfort at night, pooling resources to keep at least one good fur blanket for the household. What's agreed on is that whatever materials they had, they used them smartly. Layering, insulation, and shared heat were the name of the game. You shift on your Viking sleeping platform and feel the firm yet forgiving give of wool-stuffed pads under you. Your head sinks into a feather-stuffed cushion that's probably more ergonomic than your memory foam monstrosity at home. The heat from the fire reaches you in waves, filtered through pelts and planks and centuries of inherited craft. You feel grounded, wrapped in textures that took weeks to make. Each fiber chosen by hand, each fur hunted or raised with purpose. It's not sleek, it's not synthetic, but it's pure comfort. The kind that wraps your bones and tells them it's okay to let go. This was how the Vikings slept, not just to recover from the day, but to rebuild themselves physically, mentally, spiritually, all through the warmth of wool, the softness of feathers, the strength of animal hide. You close your eyes, and in that moment, it's easy to believe they slept better than we ever have. In the next section, we'll throw some sparks into the story, literally, because when you depend on a fire for heat and light, you start designing your entire sleep routine around it. Let's find out how fire, smoke, and glowing embers shaped the way Vikings eased into rest. The fire is low now, reduced to a soft orange glow beneath blackened logs, but it's still the heartbeat of the longhouse. Tonight, you're going to fall asleep watching the flames twist and stutter, casting warm shadows across beams carved with the stories of your ancestors. The Vikings didn't just survive with fire, they harmonized with it. Everything from the structure of their homes to the timing of their sleep revolved around its flickering presence. It wasn't just heat, it was life, and it absolutely determined how and how well they slept. So, here you are, stretched out beside a wide hearth that runs like a spine through the center of the longhouse. It's not like the fireplaces you're used to, those neat brick boxes on suburban walls. This is a long, shallow pit set right into the floor, fed with thick logs and kindling strategically banked before bedtime. It doesn't roar. It pulses. It breathes. Someone in the household, usually an elder or an early riser, will tend the coals through the night, keeping the rhythm steady and the heat consistent. This fire is never fully extinguished, even in the dead of summer. It's sacred and it's essential. Here's where things get interesting. The way fire interacted with Viking sleep wasn't just about warmth. It was about timing. The presence of low, warm light helped cue the body into natural rest cycles. Modern sleep science now talks about circadian rhythms and blue light suppression, But the Vikings didn't need lectures or TikTok hacks. They had firelight. And firelight is perfect. It's red and amber and low lumen. Ideal for nudging your body toward melatonin production. No bright lights, no screens frying your eyeballs at midnight. Just the slow, dim transition from daylight to dream. The longhouse wasn't without its problems, though. Remember, this was all happening in a structure made of wood, animal hair, and open flame. Fires were both comfort and constant risk. The roof beams were dark with soot, and the air, especially in winter, when the vents were shut tight, could get smoky fast. You'd wake up coughing if you slept too close to the hearth. You'd freeze if you were too far from it. So, the household learned to position sleepers in layers. Closer to the fire were the young, the sick, the elderly. The strong and healthy curled up further out, wrapped in more furs, trusting their bodies and each other. Still, even with that smoky air, there was something hypnotic about it. As the firelight flickered against the walls, it would throw up shapes and patterns. Dragons flapping their wings, trees swaying in wind, faces forming and melting back into shadow. Kids might fall asleep mid-story, listening to tales while staring into those dancing lights. Adults might mutter prayers to Freya or Odin while poking the coals with an iron rod. Dreams, it was said, could be shaped by firelight. How it moved, how it warmed, how it whispered through the dark. That's not just folklore, that's ambiance. One curious detail: some Norse households would burn certain herbs or woods at night, not just to mask the scent of longhouse life, but to calm the mind. Birch bark, juniper, pine resin. These weren't random. Juniper, in particular, was believed to protect against evil spirits, especially the kind that slipped into dreams. Think of it as a Viking essential oil diffuser, minus the Pinterest board. The resulting smoke added to the overall environment. Sleep wasn't a sterile act. It was earthy, ritualistic, enveloped in scent, sound, and low light. There's actually a pretty lively scholarly debate about just how much smoke was inside these homes. Some archaeologists argue that longhouses would have been nearly unbearable during long winters, filled with choking air and soot-stained everything. But others point to the ingenious use of air vents, ceiling gaps, and carefully managed fuel choices to argue that the smoke was part of the balance. Yes, a little irritating at times, but better than freezing. There's even a theory that the mild exposure to smoke might have helped build stronger lungs or fend off bacteria. Not that the Vikings were writing health blogs about it, but you get the idea. You shift in your sleeping nook, finding that perfect angle where the radiant heat from the fire hits your back and the pelt over your chest locks it all in. The air smells faintly of pine resin and something vaguely meaty. Someone probably left a bit of stew near the hearth to warm overnight. The crackle of a log collapsing in on itself is the only real sound. This is your nightlight, your fireplace, your stove, your security system. It does everything except make you breakfast. By now, your body is adjusting. The fire tells your cells it's time to power down. Your muscles, sore from whatever pre-modern labor you did, maybe chopping wood, mending nets, or hauling stones, are relaxing. The heat soothes the aches. The rhythm of the embers is slow and steady. And in this dread-lit haze, your mind starts to drift, gently nudged toward dreams. You're not falling asleep to digital noise or a glow-in-the-dark alarm clock. You're falling asleep to actual rhythm and warmth, the kind humans have relied on for thousands of years. And that's the core of it, really. Viking sleep wasn't just about where you lay or what you lay on. It was about the entire sensory environment: temperature, light, scent, sound. Everything worked in harmony to transition your body into real, honest rest. Nothing artificial, nothing forced, just fire, breath, and time. So you let your eyes close, listening to the soft crackle of the coals, letting that warmth seep into your bones. Someone murmurs in their sleep across the room. The goat stirs and resettles. Outside, the wind howls across snowdrifts, but inside the world is perfectly still. You're not asleep yet, but you're close, drifting, floating, suspended in glow. And just before you slip under, you wonder, what did they dream about? In the next section, we'll explore how social rituals and nightly routines, storytelling, togetherness, and yes, proto-hygge, wove Viking sleep into something deeply communal and strangely modern. Evening in the Viking world wasn't just about collapsing into furs after a hard day of hunting or threshing barley. It was a winding down ritual, slow and shared, thick with stories, laughter, silence, and the unmistakable feeling of being exactly where you belonged. If you're picturing a household that just grunted, rolled into pelts, and passed out from sheer exhaustion, think again. Viking nights were a social symphony, and honestly, it's giving strong proto-hygge vibes. The kind of communal comfort that your modern lifestyle can only dream of between missed calls and food delivery apps. The longhouse transforms at dusk. The same people who spent the day outside in the fields, forests, or fjords now gather closer to the hearth. The fire is coaxed into a steady blaze, casting that warm amber light across faces marked by the wind and sun. Wool cloaks are removed, boots lined up, and someone begins ladling stew from a pot that's been simmering for hours. The scent of root vegetables, herbs, and possibly dried fish floats up into the beams. This is the moment when the stories begin. Not just tales for kids, though the little ones are front row center, curled up in laps or clinging to older siblings, but real oral histories. Stories of ancestors, of the gods, of tricksters and frost giants, and distant voyages to lands no one's seen. You can hear the cadence in the voice of the storyteller, rising and falling with the flicker of the flames. There are jokes, too, off-color of course, and probably full of inside references to someone's terrible fishing luck or a goat that escaped 3 times last week. You sit among them, sharing this moment, not speaking much, just listening, just breathing. The room is a low hum of fire and voice, and the occasional crunch of crusty bread. Everyone's moving slower now. Someone's darning socks. Another is carving a bit of bone into a brooch. The children begin to slouch and blink more slowly. A few lie flat on the wooden platforms, with their heads in someone's lap. No one tells them to go to bed. Bed comes to them slowly, like dusk itself. This communal space is more than just a convenience. It's the anchor. In a world filled with uncertainty, weather that can kill, enemies on the coast, and spirits in the woods, these moments of closeness are the nightly defense. You may not know what tomorrow holds, but tonight the circle holds you. That's a pretty effective sedative. And not to stir up your existential guilt or anything, but how often do you wind down with people like this? When was the last time you sat in dim light, shared food, and just existed? Here's a delightful fringe fact. Many Norse people considered storytelling a kind of magic. Not metaphorically, literally magic. The spoken word was thought to hold power, especially when it referenced gods, fate, or family lines. To speak the name of an ancestor out loud was to keep them present, which means bedtime stories weren't just cute distractions. They were spiritual reinforcement, a way to remind yourself who you were, where you came from, and who would watch over you while you slept. That social aspect of Viking sleep culture is something modern researchers have only recently started to dig into. For a long time, history focused on their violence, trade, and seafaring, less on how they curled up beside their children or told tales late into the night. But now scholars are asking, how did the social fabric of Viking households influence emotional well-being? How did that deep nightly connection affect dreams, rest, or even survival? There's no clear consensus yet, but growing evidence suggests that emotional closeness, even in tight physical quarters, contributed to a stronger sense of safety and therefore better sleep. The irony. While many of us have private bedrooms and memory foam mattresses, we often sleep alone, disconnected, restless. You lie back, belly warm from broth, and your head a little hazy from the slow rhythm of communal wind down. Someone's voice still carries through the room, telling the last bits of a myth about a mountain that ate goats. There's laughter, soft and easy. Someone reaches over and tucks a blanket over a child's shoulder. A dog shifts and lays its head on your foot. This isn't a performance, it's a ritual, and it happens every night. The Vikings might not have had Instagrammable interiors or calming spa playlists, but they had something better: togetherness. You could call it practical. Sharing heat, avoiding loneliness, warding off night spirits. But there's an emotional component too. Knowing that when the world outside grows dark and wild, you are inside in light with others. The boundaries of your body and the boundary of the group start to blur. That kind of safety seeps into your bones and lingers long after the fire burns down. One thing modern anthropologists debate is how much of this communal sleeping was voluntary versus just necessary. Would Vikings have preferred separate rooms if they could? Or did they actually enjoy the nightly togetherness? Hard to say, but based on the cultural emphasis on kinship, storytelling, and warmth, it's not hard to imagine that the nightly ritual was as emotionally fulfilling as it was functional. Maybe they didn't just tolerate the closeness. Maybe they needed it. So you stretch out a little, feeling the warmth of nearby bodies and the lull of conversation trailing off. The story fades. The fire pops. Someone snores. Not obnoxiously, just enough to remind you that they're there, that you're not alone, and that the darkness outside is just background noise to the little light you all keep together. And now your body is ready, like fully unapologetically ready for sleep. It's not some battle of melatonin supplements and white noise machines. It's just what comes next. Your head dips back, your chest rises and falls, and you let yourself drift, buoyed by the soft, unseen threads of community that are still gently humming all around you. In the next section, things get more intense in a good way, Because it's not just the social rituals that set you up for peak sleep. It's the fact that Viking days were physically demanding to the core. Let's see how rowing across icy seas and swinging an axe, like it owes you money, can knock a person out like no lullaby ever could. You don't just fall asleep after a Viking day. You collapse into it, muscles aching in the most satisfying way, bones humming with that delicious earned exhaustion. Forget gym memberships and 10,000 steps a day. Viking life was a full-body workout from the moment the sun peeked over the fjord to the second it disappeared behind the hills. That kind of non-stop physical labor didn't just make for productive days. It primed the body for sleep so deep it could drown your dreams in it. And honestly, it might have been the best sleep aid nature ever invented. Let's rewind to earlier in the day, just before the sun reached its highest. You've already been awake for hours. No alarm clock, just the gradual light filtering in through the smoke vents. The gentle rustle as others stir, the rhythmic shuffle of boots on packed earth. You stretched, groaned, maybe rubbed your eyes against the wool of your tunic, then got moving. No time for 5 more minutes. It's time to get to work. And work for the average Viking meant work. Heavy lifting, hard travel, and exposure to the elements. You might be plowing a frost-hardened field with an ox-drawn wooden plow, chopping down trees for firewood, hauling water in clay jars, or mending fishing nets with cold fingers. If you're a sailor or raider, you've been rowing for hours through wind and waves and freezing mist, your hands wrapped around an oar so thick it could double as a club on the wrong rhythm, and your seatmate gets a paddle to the ribs. It's a full-body coordination challenge paired with the knowledge that if you screw up, the North Sea won't hesitate to eat your boat. These weren't just chores. They were survival. Vikings didn't have convenience. They were their own convenience. Food didn't arrive in boxes. It came from traps, hunts, and fields. Clothes didn't show up in carts. They had to be sheared, spun, woven, and stitched. Every day was spent moving, lifting, hauling, walking, climbing hills, tending livestock, repairing buildings. There's a good chance you burned more calories just existing in Viking times than you do now on your best gym day, with a personal trainer and an IV drip of pre-workout. And that's the key, because all that movement didn't just wear you down, it calibrated your whole body. By the time evening rolls around, your muscles are loose and heavy. Your blood has flowed through every capillary, and your nervous system is in that gorgeous post-exertion lull. Scientists today would say your parasympathetic nervous system is kicking in. That deep rest mode that counteracts stress and lets the body regenerate. Back then, they just called it life. Here's a fringe fact for you. Viking skeletons examined in archaeological digs often show heavy wear on joints, spines, and knees. Proof of the physically intense lifestyle they led. But interestingly, many of them also show signs of long-term healing, suggesting that these weren't people who just broke down. Their bodies adapted. They recovered. They didn't just get wrecked every day. They built strength, durability, and most likely a tolerance for deep, muscle-repairing sleep. Now, not everyone had the same routine. Women, for instance, often did as much physical labor as men, just in different forms. Weaving was no dainty pastime. It required core strength and hours of standing. Cooking meant grinding grain by hand, lifting cauldrons, and tending fires all day. Children started chores young. whether that meant shepherding goats or hauling water by dusk. No matter your role in the household, you felt it. Your arms, legs, back, all tired, not injured, just ready to rest. Of course, some scholars question whether Vikings really had better sleep. Sure, their bodies were tired, but what about pain, infection, cold? Wouldn't all that make sleep worse? That's the debate. One camp argues that chronic aches and untreated injuries might have disrupted sleep for many, especially elders. But the other side counters that a life spent outdoors, physically engaged and attuned to nature's rhythms, might actually lead to better quality sleep, even with a few sore joints. You lying now in your fur-lined bed probably don't feel pain. You feel spent. You feel the kind of fatigue that doesn't come with a screen-induced headache or a stiff neck from sitting at a desk all day. You feel the weight of a body that worked and moved and pushed. And now your nervous system is thanking you. Cortisol levels drop, heart rate slows, muscles soften. You're not counting sheep, you're becoming one with the herd. Even the timing of Viking life supported this kind of rest. There was no up late answering emails or midnight scrolling. When the sun went down and chores were done, the body listened. It had no reason to resist. Tiredness wasn't an inconvenience. It was the signal that the day had been used well. And this physical tiredness didn't just help with falling asleep. It likely improved sleep quality. You're more likely to reach deeper stages of sleep when your body actually needs to repair itself. You sleep deeper. You dream harder. You stay asleep longer. And when you wake, it's not to the piercing shriek of an alarm, but to the quiet breath of a longhouse slowly stirring to life again. So here you are, body heavy, cocooned in wool and fur, warmed from the fire and from the day itself. Your limbs twitch slightly with the aftershocks of motion. Your mind is empty. No to-do lists, no emails, no blue light. Just the satisfaction of knowing that everything you did today had purpose, that your body earned this rest in the most primal, beautiful way possible. In the next section, we're heading into the deep dark, the kind you can't imagine unless you've lived without electricity. Because in the Viking world, the long winter nights weren't just a seasonal inconvenience, they were a sacred sleepening gift. Let's see what happens when the sun disappears for weeks and darkness becomes your new lullaby. Darkness. Real darkness. The kind that feels like velvet pulled over your eyes, over the sky, over the whole wide world. That's what you're living in now as a Viking entering the long night of winter in the far north. You think you know dark, but unless you've spent weeks without a sun, without even a pale blue smear on the horizon, you've never felt anything like this. In the Viking world, especially near the Arctic Circle, the sun didn't just set, it vanished for days, sometimes weeks. A twilight gloom at midday, maybe. But for the most part, winter turned everything into one long, uninterrupted dusk. And you might assume this eternal night drove people to madness, like some sort of ancient Scandinavian horror story. But no, what it actually did, what it primed the human body to do, was sleep. Deep, uninterrupted, restorative sleep, a hibernation of sorts. And it was glorious. You wake up slowly, not because something stirs you, but because your body's finished its shift in dreamland. There's no sunbeam crawling across the floor to nudge you awake. There's just a slight shift in the fire's warmth, the murmur of someone stirring beside you, the rustle of wool as someone adjusts a blanket. You blink into darkness and realize it's still night. Of course it is. You've been asleep for who knows how long, and yet the sky outside is still heavy, starless, thick with the cold, and your body says quite clearly, "Don't get up yet." This is where the Viking relationship with darkness gets interesting. Without artificial lights, their circadian rhythms were synced almost perfectly with the natural world. When darkness stretched on for 20 hours a day, your body simply adjusted. It didn't fight. It slept longer. It slowed down. Winter for Vikings wasn't just about surviving the cold. It was about resting deeply and often. When the sun disappeared, so did urgency. Here's a strange but beautiful fringe fact. During the deepest winters, some Norse communities adjusted their daily rhythms entirely. They'd wake for short periods in the morning, do light chores or eat, and then sleep again. They didn't force a strict schedule. They moved like tides, rising briefly, then ebbing back into sleep. Modern science now calls this biphasic or polyphasic sleep. Back then, it was just how things worked. You followed the darkness because your body wanted to. You didn't have to wrestle with it. And it wasn't just the quantity of sleep, it was the quality. When the world is dark and cold, your brain starts releasing melatonin like it's throwing a party. That hormone isn't just for falling asleep. It helps regulate how you sleep, how long you stay in deep cycles, how vividly you dream. With fewer disruptions and no light pollution, Viking brains were probably flooded with it during winter. You know those mornings when you wake up not remembering falling asleep, not even moving, just blank peaceful rest. That was every night for them in midwinter. Of course, not everyone sees this as a utopia of slumber. Some scholars argue that extended darkness could have caused seasonal depression, especially in communities that didn't have as much food or firewood stored. And, yeah, it's possible. Imagine days without real light, relying on fire alone, knowing your supplies have to last until spring. But here's the counter-argument. Because people slowed down, they used less energy. They ate less, moved less, and yes, slept more. The long sleep wasn't laziness. It was strategy. You stir again on your platform, wrapped in furs. It's hard to tell whether it's morning or night or some in between, but that's part of the point. The longhouse is still dim. No one's bustling about. Maybe a few whispers. Maybe someone adding a log to the fire, its red glow flaring and then settling back down. You could get up, but you don't because there's no shame in continuing to rest. In fact, it's expected. Your body is conserving warmth, rebuilding torn strength. Outside, it's freezing and silent. Inside, it's all quiet breathing and gentle sleep. And here's another odd fact. Many Norse cultures believed that the long darkness was a time when the boundary between worlds thinned. Dreams meant more. Night had power. You might wake from a vision of your grandfather standing in the snow saying nothing, or of a god walking across a frozen sea. You'd tell someone the next morning, or the next time you were both awake. Whenever that happened. Dreams weren't ignored. They were cataloged, remembered, sometimes acted upon. The longer you slept, the deeper you went into that dream realm and the more you brought back. With the sun absent, there was also a deeper reverence for light itself. Fire wasn't just warmth, it was hope. The hearth was kept alive, not just out of utility, but to mark a center, a psychological beacon. Everyone oriented around it. It meant safety, time, order. Without it, you'd lose track. But with it, even if the darkness outside stretched on for days, your little world still had a pulse. As the hours pass, you might wake again, share a warm drink, maybe some porridge or dried berries. Then you stretch, yawn, and pull your blanket back up. You're not lazy. You're living the rhythm that nature gave you. The darkness says rest, so you do. We like to imagine that our ancestors were always in motion, chopping wood, battling trolls, rowing furiously toward England. But truthfully, part of Viking strength came from knowing when not to push, when to lie still, when to conserve, when to let the body rebuild beneath layers of fur while the outside world turned black and silent. So, as you nestle deeper into your bedding, your breath fogging just slightly in the air, you realize you're not resisting the dark, you're resting in it. And maybe, just maybe, your modern life could use a bit more of that. Less fighting the night, more sinking into it, letting it do what it was always meant to do. Wrap you up, shut you down, and carry you gently into another dream. In the next section, we'll talk about the sounds of the Viking night. Not the kind that kept you awake, but the ones that soothed you into sleep. From distant sea winds to animal murmurs, we're diving into the Norse soundscape and why it might be the most effective white noise machine you've never considered. It's the kind of night that hums quietly at the edges of your ears. Not silent, not noisy, but rich with texture. You're wrapped in furs again, still half floating in that liminal place between waking and sleep. And what holds you there like a hand on your chest is sound. Not the sharp buzz of a streetlight or the digital chirp of a phone notification. Not traffic or neighbors or late-night television bleeding through the wall. No, this is a Viking night, and it sounds like nothing and everything all at once. Let's start with the wind. Outside the longhouse, it's rushing in long, sweeping gusts across frozen fields and hills. The sea's not far off. You can smell it in the air, even when you can't see it. Some nights, if the weather's right, you can hear waves breaking against rocky shores, slow and rhythmic, like a massive creature breathing in its sleep. This sound doesn't keep you awake. It anchors you. The wind rattles the thatch above, but the walls don't groan. The longhouse was built for this. Thick logs, tightly fitted planks, moss stuffed between every seam to keep out the draft. You're warm. You're safe. The wind just sings to you. Then come the animals. Livestock sleep nearby, not just for convenience, but because their body heat helps keep the house warm. On a quiet night like this, you can hear a cow shift in its pen, a horse gently stomping in its stall, chickens cooing in their sleep, clustered together like one fluffy mass. And then there's the dog curled up at your feet, occasionally twitching with dreams of whatever dogs dream about, chasing spirits, barking at Thor, maybe just a very determined rabbit. Either way, it's comforting. These sounds aren't a nuisance. They're the heartbeat of the household. One odd but delightful fringe fact. Cats were everywhere in Viking homes, and not just for catching mice. They were seen as magical, protective, and often associated with the goddess Freya. So when you hear the soft scratch of claws on timber, or feel something small and warm curling up beside you, it's probably one of those divine little murderers purring its way into your blanket. The vibration of a cat purring has even been shown in modern studies to promote healing and reduce stress, which means your Viking nap buddy is basically an organic white noise machine with mystical credentials. The human side of the soundscape is no less comforting. Someone snoring gently across the room. Not the chainsaw kind, just soft exhalations that rise and fall with firelight. Occasionally, someone murmurs in their sleep, shifting in their bedding. A baby cries, but only briefly, quickly soothed by the hush of a mother's voice and the rhythmic bounce of feet on floorboards. There's no panic, no irritation. Nighttime interruptions are normal here. You respond, settle, and sleep again. And over it all, the fire. Always the fire. It crackles low in the center of the longhouse, burning steady, never quite silent. The sound of it is hypnotic. Soft pops, shifting coals, the occasional sigh of heat meeting cold. It's not loud, not sharp, but it marks time in its own way, a living metronome. You could fall asleep just to the rhythm of the fire alone. In fact, you probably already are. Some nights, depending on the season and the weather, you might hear other sounds too. Wolves in the distance, howling across the snowfields. Not close, far enough to be haunting rather than threatening. Owls calling to each other in the trees. The creak of a branch heavy with ice. None of it jars you. In the Viking world, you grow up with these sounds. You learn them. You know which are safe and which mean danger. And tonight, everything feels safe. Modern sleep researchers talk a lot about sound pollution. How even small noises can disrupt REM sleep, fragment your rest, or leave you feeling groggy. Vikings didn't have soundproofing, but what they did have was consistency. The sounds of the longhouse were predictable, natural, reassuring. There's something incredibly grounding about that. You don't jolt awake because of a car horn or a distant siren. You fall asleep to the same soft chorus every night. That consistency also helped with sleep rituals. You weren't just lying down in a new, unfamiliar space every night. You were returning to something deeply known. Your body learned to associate these sounds, the rustle of furs, the breathing of others, the sigh of wind, with sleep. The habit loop was hardwired. You hear the goat cough once in its sleep, and your brain goes, "Ah, time to dream." There's a scholarly debate worth mentioning here. Some historians argue that the Viking longhouse, with all its occupants and noise, couldn't possibly have been conducive to deep sleep. Surely it was too chaotic, too crowded. But the counterpoint, and it's a strong one, is that for people who live communally, these sounds weren't interruptions. They were signals of safety. In a dangerous world, the noise of the herd, of the family, the fire was a lullaby. Silence, by contrast, meant danger, emptiness, isolation, something wrong. You didn't need to filter out the sound. You welcomed it. And so here you lie, wrapped in warmth, surrounded by murmurs and rustles, and a fire that never quite goes out. The soundscape is rich but gentle, full but never overwhelming. Everything you hear feeds your sense of belonging, your place in the circle, your role in the home, your connection to the land outside and the people within. You don't need earplugs. You don't need white noise machines. You just need this, the sound of a Viking night, layered and living. Your breathing slows to match the rhythm around you. The fire, the sleepers, the dog, the wind. It's all there, and it holds you. It says you can rest now. We're all here. Nothing's coming for you tonight. In the next section, we'll drift into a more mystical realm, because for Vikings, sleep wasn't just rest. It was a gateway. Dreams weren't random. They were visions, signs, even visits from the dead. Let's dive into how the Norse saw the sleeping mind not as escape, but as communion with something far greater. Somewhere in the folds of sleep, you feel a shift. Not in your body, which is wrapped warm and still beneath heavy wool and furs, but in your mind. The fire crackles gently. The longhouse breathes around you. But inside, something opens. A pathway, maybe a space that wasn't there before. Because to a Viking, dreaming isn't just the random shuffle of memories and fantasy. It's a bridge, a message, a glimpse beyond the veil. And now you're walking across it. In Norse culture, sleep and dreams weren't private, idle things. They were powerful. Dreams could carry warnings. They could offer blessings. They could whisper fate. You'd wake from one, not with a shrug, but with your heart pounding, already rehearsing how you'd tell the others at breakfast. What signs you saw, who appeared to you, what shadowy symbols hovered just beyond your understanding. You might even believe you'd traveled while you slept, not in some metaphor, but in soul. The Vikings believed the soul had a few different parts, and one of them, the hugr, was the self itself that could drift during sleep. The hugr could visit other people, slip into dreams, leave omens, or receive them. You've just spent a day hauling nets, cutting firewood, eating stew by the fire. But as your body rests, your hugr steps out quietly, naturally, like mist rising from water. You don't even feel it go. And where it goes, that depends. Maybe you dream of your grandmother, who died 2 winters ago. She's sitting beside a hearth that isn't yours, humming a song you haven't heard since childhood. She doesn't speak, but she looks at you deeply. You wake with her face still burned into your thoughts. And for the rest of the day, you'll carry the weight of that silence. Was it a warning, a blessing? Was she calling you or reminding you to live better? Or maybe you dream of a mountain crumbling into the sea, or a raven flying backward, or wolves walking in a circle. These aren't just weird dreams. They mean something. Or at least everyone agrees they might. The local seer or vulva, a wise woman trained in the reading of symbols and threads of fate, might be consulted the next day. She listens. She stirs runes. She says, "Be careful of strangers this week," or "The gods are testing your courage," or "Prepare for a journey." In the Viking worldview, the sleeping mind speaks a language the waking mind forgets, but it still listens. Some nights, dreams are more intimate. A lover long gone returns. You kiss, you dance, you hold hands in snow. It feels so real. You wake up aching. And in Viking culture, no one would scoff at that. No one says it was just a dream, because just doesn't exist here. The line between waking and sleeping is porous. Everyone accepts that some part of you leaves the room at night, and some things may find their way in. Here's a fascinating fringe fact. In Norse poetry and sagas, dreams often serve as turning points. Kings see their own deaths. Heroes receive quests. Entire battles are foretold in sleep. And while some modern historians call these literary devices, Others argue that the Norse really did interpret their dreams as prophecy, not in a vague horoscope way, but with full seriousness. Dreaming was a form of communication. The dead weren't gone. The gods weren't far. They were waiting, watching for the right moment to appear. You roll over in your bedding, the firelight dancing across closed eyelids. Somewhere outside, the wind moans low, like a voice just out of reach. The longhouse is mostly quiet, but there's a sense always that you're not entirely alone. You never are. Ancestors are close. Spirits pass through. The very idea of ghosts, as we understand them, didn't quite exist for the Vikings. They believed in the draugr, the restless dead, but also in helpful presences, guardians, spirits of land and home, even the dead who still loved you enough to visit. Sometimes entire rituals were built around dreams. If a family member had a recurring vision, it might be taken as a sign to move, to change a child's name, to offer gifts to a neglected god. Dreams weren't compartmentalized or dismissed. They were folded into life's fabric. You might spend the day hunting, but the night could decide your next voyage. Modern researchers find this worldview both fascinating and challenging. Some call it superstition and an attempt to make sense of random neural firings. But others suggest the Norse understanding of dreams reflects something we've lost: reverence for the inner world, a respect for the subconscious as not just noise but signal. In their world, dreams were messages worth decoding. In ours, they're mostly forgotten by breakfast. You stir again, hovering between sleep stages, and this time the dream is stranger. A tree with silver leaves, roots stretching through snow, whispering your name in a voice you know but can't place. You open your eyes. The longhouse is still around you. The fire's low. No one is awake, but your chest is heavy with something you can't explain. Maybe in the morning, you'll talk to the old woman who lives near the edge of the village. Maybe she'll know what silver leaves mean. The Viking relationship with dreaming isn't a fairy tale. It's a full belief system, and it shapes their nights just as much as the firs and fires do. To sleep is not just to rest, but to journey, and you never quite know where or to whom you'll go. In the next section, we'll return to the physical and explore the way sleep spaces changed based on age and role. Whether you were a chieftain, a child, or an old widow with a cat, where and how you slept told the world who you were. Not all Viking sleepers were created equal. Sure, the longhouse was communal. And yes, everyone shared the same firelight, breathed the same smoky air, and drifted to sleep beneath the same sagging thatch roof. But where you lay your head within that space spoke volumes. Age, status, and your role within the family decided exactly how cozy your sleep would be. The Viking household wasn't a democracy of bedding. It was more like a layered, fur-covered hierarchy of snoozing souls. So tonight, as you roll onto your side and gaze out across the dim longhouse, you start to notice the subtle pecking order. Closest to the hearth, prime real estate, you'll find the most senior members of the household. The matriarch or patriarch, usually an elder, lies near the warmth, often surrounded by grandchildren like little blankets with feet. This is both practical and respectful. Elders are more vulnerable to the cold, and their life experience grants them this central position. It's also symbolic. They are the memory keepers, the story bearers. Sleep near them, and you sleep near the heart of your lineage. Then come the parents, the active heads of the household, those still running farms, managing trades, swinging axes and giving birth. Their bedding might be shared. Two adults wrapped together under thick layers, children flanking them like human heating pads. These are the people keeping the longhouse running. Their sleep is earned and sacred, but often interrupted. Children cry. The fire needs tending. A goat starts snoring too loudly. They wake easily, but they fall back asleep just as fast. Resilience is their superpower. Children get the edges, usually not pushed into the coldest corners, but definitely not center stage. You'll find them curled up in little bundles of wool and fur, occasionally wrapped in their parents' cloaks or sharing space with siblings. And because sleep wasn't a solitary affair, there was no expectation for privacy or independence. Kids weren't being tucked into their own rooms. They were part of the living organism of the household, breathing, dreaming, growing right alongside everyone else. Teenagers? Well, it depends. Older sons might be sleeping with the farmhands or near the storage rooms, especially if they're nearing the age when they'll start sleeping on boats more than in beds. Daughters who are nearing marriage age might still sleep with the family, but a bit more tucked away, maybe near an aunt or a grandmother. In some wealthier homes, there were partitions or small box beds carved directly into the walls. Just enough space to roll over and whisper your secrets into the darkness. But even those didn't offer solitude. They just suggested it. Now, here's where things get fascinating. In Viking society, sleep was also a reflection of your spiritual status. A vulva, a seer or wise woman, might be given a separate corner, a quiet space where she could dream more deeply, unbothered by the snores of goats and fishermen. People believed her dreams carried more weight, that her hugger traveled farther. So if she needed silence, she got it. Sometimes she slept surrounded by charms or herbs, or near the bones of her ancestors, for ambiance. And what about servants or thralls? Yes, they were there too. They often slept at the farthest end of the house, away from the hearth, but still under the same roof. Their bedding was simpler, rougher, maybe just straw and one thin layer of wool, but they were still part of the night's rhythm. The longhouse wasn't segregated by walls, so even the humblest sleeper breathed the same smoke and listened to the same wind rattle the beams. There's a quirky fringe fact tucked into a saga from Iceland. One woman's bed was said to be so piled with blankets and pelts that it took 3 people to make it properly. This wasn't just comfort, it was status. Riches weren't just shown off at feasts or battles. They showed up in how warm you were at 2 a.m. Some beds were stacked like ships, fur over wool, over feather, over fur again, until the sleeper basically disappeared into a soft Viking lasagna. Sleep wasn't only physical, it was symbolic. A chieftain's bed might have carved runes on the headboard, blessings of strength and protection. Children's beds could be adorned with animal motifs, warding off spirits. Some even carved family stories into the side of the bed frame like a headboardized saga. And when someone died, their bedding might be burned or buried with them, a soft send-off into the next life, proving that even in death, sleep still mattered. Of course, scholars debate how rigid these sleep hierarchies really were. Were roles strictly enforced? Did a woman always sleep with her children? Could a farmhand claim a warmer spot during a harsh winter, Some believe there was more flexibility than we assume, especially when survival was on the line. If your baby was sick, you moved them closer to the fire, no matter who usually slept there. If your back was aching, maybe you traded spots for a night. The longhouse, for all its order, was still a living space, adaptable, fluid, human. You wake up not because something startles you, and not because an alarm is screaming beside your head. There's no chirp, no chime, no vibration under your pillow. You wake because your body says gently and confidently, "It's time." The fire has burned down to embers. A bit of light slips in through a crack above the doorway, barely there, but enough. Someone across the longhouse stirs and yawns. Another body shifts beside you, pulls a blanket tighter. There's no rush, no clamor, just the slow, silent transition from sleep to waking. This is how a Viking gets up. Not jolted, not panicked, just rising like smoke. The Vikings had no clocks. That's obvious. No sundials in the longhouse, no hourglasses ticking down the minutes until you had to punch into your job or tend goats. But they had rhythm and they had instinct, and those were enough. In the Viking world, your day wasn't defined by 7:30 wake-ups or 5 shutdowns. It was shaped by light, temperature, hunger, and movement. Your internal clock, called the circadian rhythm, was finely tuned, not to digits on a screen, but to the sky. You're stretching now, quietly, feeling the stiffness melt out of your arms and legs. Someone hands you a cup of warm liquid, maybe a weak broth, or even water warmed over the fire. It's not coffee. You don't need coffee. You're not recovering from a night of artificial stimulation and poor quality sleep. You're just gently rebooting. You've had a full cycle, maybe even 2. The kind of sleep that rolls in slow, goes deep, and doesn't apologize. One of the secrets here is that Vikings didn't separate bedtime from the rest of life in the way we do now. There was no performative bedtime routine. No face masks, no meditation apps, no doom scrolling until your retina's fried. Sleep was a phase, not a performance. No arrived at sleep slowly, intentionally, heated, loosened, softened. If sleep was a ritual, the sauna was the invocation. There's some scholarly debate about how widespread or frequent sauna use truly was. Archaeological evidence varies across regions. Finland, Sweden, Norway, and Iceland all had different environmental factors and resources. Some historians argue that daily use was more common in certain areas, while others use saunas primarily on specific days or for ceremonial cleansing. But few deny the presence of heat bathing in Viking life. It shows up in sagas, law codes, even poetry. And for women especially, the sauna was more than functional. It was social, a place to talk, share stories, pass down knowledge. Sometimes childbirth happened here, healing ceremonies, rituals for fertility or protection. Even the dead were sometimes washed and prepared in these heated spaces. It was a womb and a tomb, place of beginning and ending, all wrapped in steam. You're walking back now from the sauna, skin still steaming in the cold air. You feel light, not just clean, but emptied, like someone poured the day out of you and left only the essentials behind. Your legs are warm, your spine loose, your face flushed and open. You climb back into the longhouse with a deep breath, the scent of smoke and herbs wrapping around you like a second skin. Now, when you lie down, There's no tension, no tightness in your shoulders, no stiff knees or knotted back muscles, just a quiet, ready body sinking into layers of fur and wool. You're not merely resting, you're recovering. The sauna gave you back your softness, and now sleep will do the rest. No wonder they slept so well. No wonder dreams came easily. When your entire evening was spent easing the body from exertion into serenity, sleep wasn't a challenge. It was the next logical step. And the Viking world, harsh, cold, brutal as it could be, still carved out this oasis of warmth and comfort. A reminder that even the toughest lives deserve gentleness. Next, we'll step outside again, but this time into how the Vikings weathered the most violent parts of the world around them. Let's explore how their architecture and sleep systems held up when storms, beasts, and the unforgiving elements tried to barge in. Because it's not a good night's rest if the roof caves in. The wind is howling again. You hear it outside the longhouse. Long, low guttural, like some ancient creature circling the structure, sniffing for a way in. Snow taps against the roof in sharp little gusts, and the trees groan like they're remembering storms from centuries past. But inside, it's still, warm, steady. You're lying beneath your furs, listening to the storm rage, but your body doesn't flinch. You're not worried. You're not reaching for your emergency phone because the Vikings built their homes like bunkers, wooden fortresses disguised as barns, and these walls have already survived more winters than you have. Let's talk about the architecture for a minute, because it's the unsung hero of Viking sleep. The longhouse wasn't just a clever place to eat or work and store a bunch of animals. It was a storm-proof cocoon built with thick timber logs, often layered and notched with precision. These homes were designed to take a beating. Wind slides right over the curved roof. Snow piles up and acts like free insulation. Rain, the steep pitch of the thatch, sends it running off the sides before it can find a crack to sneak through. And here's the key. The longhouse flexed. It wasn't a stiff box waiting to break. The wooden beams were joined in a way that let the house shift slightly with pressure, bending under snow loads or bracing against hard winds. You know that satisfying creak old houses make during a storm? Yeah, imagine that. But on purpose. It's like the house is alive, moving with the weather, not fighting it. Inside, you feel the difference. You're not lying awake, shivering, wondering if the roof will collapse. You're surrounded by warmth, literal and emotional. The fire still burns. The logs don't shake. Someone turns in their sleep beside you, pulling a blanket tighter. You listen to the outside noise and realize it's actually comforting. Proof that you're protected. A lullaby if you let it be. Now consider the door, just one, usually low and thick with a heavy timber bar across it at night. You duck to enter and exit, which helps trap heat, but it also serves a defensive function. The Vikings weren't paranoid, but they were prepared. Whether it was wolves, bandits, or spirits, the longhouse wasn't just shelter. It was sanctuary. That locked door wasn't symbolic. It was survival. And it wasn't just the walls that helped you sleep through storms. It was the people. You didn't lie there alone, wondering if you were the only one awake, the only one listening to the roof groan. You were surrounded by kin, by friends, by creatures that trusted you. The weight of other bodies, of shared breath, and quiet snoring was its own kind of defense. The longhouse was loud with life, and that noise made you safe. Fringe fact for you, some Norse longhouses were partially built into the earth. Dug into hillsides or with turf piled high around the walls, these homes used the ground itself as insulation. Earth doesn't just hold heat, it muffles sound. Which means during a snowstorm or a wind howler, the noise outside was reduced even further. You were sleeping in something halfway between a cabin and a cave. The fire, of course, played its part, kept low and steady overnight. It wasn't just for warmth. The light of the embers made it easier to orient yourself in the dark if you woke. No pitch-black fumbling, just a red-orange glow like the heartbeat of the house itself. And the hearthstone stayed warm long after the flames died down, radiating heat through the floorboards. You could literally feel the house breathing warmth back into you. There's some academic debate about just how weatherproof these structures were. Some scholars say that the longhouses leaked, that the smoke caused breathing issues, or that drafts still made winter nights brutal. Others argue that Viking engineering, particularly in Iceland and coastal Norway, was advanced enough to create genuine comfort, even in sub-zero temperatures. But no matter where they fall, most agree on one thing. The Viking sleep environment was resilient. It didn't chase perfection. It chased survival with comfort. And then there were the animals. Yes, the goats, the cows, the dogs, and cats, and chickens. They were part of the system. Not just because they needed shelter, but because they helped create shelter. Body heat from livestock added crucial warmth to the space. The animals slept too, bundled in corners, tucked into stalls, sometimes curled right up beside you. Ever had a dog nap across your feet? Imagine 3 goats doing the same thing, and now you've got a natural heating grid. This communal animal-included sleep system wasn't sloppy. It was calculated. People positioned themselves based on what they needed. The sick closer to the fire. Children surrounded by adults. Livestock near doors to absorb the chill. Even the dog had a job. Warmth, companionship, and maybe an alert bark if anything wandered too close in the night. And sure, there were nights when the wind blew so hard it felt like the gods were wrestling above the roof. When snow piled up past the windows, when a fox screamed in the distance and made every hair on your neck stand up. But inside, you were in the belly of something strong. Something designed to keep the dark out and the dreams in. You roll over in your bedding. The storm's still there, still trying. But you're already drifting again. You don't need silence to sleep. You need certainty. And that's exactly what this longhouse gives you. Certainty in every beam, every stone, every creak of timber. It's not perfect, but it's enough. It's home. Next, we'll lean even further into the wild, because the Vikings didn't just sleep with family. Sometimes they slept with hooves and claws, and wet noses pressed into their backs. Let's explore the surprisingly cozy and weirdly efficient world of animal co-sleeping in the Viking Age. There's a damp nose pressed into your foot. It twitches once, then withdraws with a soft snort and a shuffle. No, you didn't time travel into a barn. You're still in the longhouse, wrapped in wool and fur, fire humming in the hearth. But tonight, you're sharing your sleeping space with half the livestock. And strangely enough, it works. It's warm. It's rhythmic. And nobody's judging you because, well, sleeping with animals is just part of Viking life. To modern ears, it might sound messy or even a bit medieval in the worst way. Who'd willingly curl up next to a goat? But to a Viking, it wasn't gross or desperate. It was normal, logical, and honestly, a little genius. Animals didn't just live in the longhouse for protection. They were part of a sleep system, a heat-generating, sound-producing, warmth-sharing part of the family that kept the nights from turning deadly during the deep winter months. Let's break it down. At one end of the longhouse, separated by a short partition or a slight elevation change, was the livestock area. Cattle, sheep, pigs, goats, all tucked in close, their body heat rising, their breath steaming in the air. On the human side, bedding was lined up on platforms raised above the cold floor. And between the two groups, nothing much. Maybe a low wooden wall, maybe just a bit of space, but the warmth carried over. The sounds did too. Soft snorts, the occasional cloven hoof shifting on straw, chickens murmuring in their sleep. And then there were the pets. Dogs and cats had full roam of the sleeping area. Cats curled up in furs, purred on people's laps, or squeezed between shoulders. Dogs, foot warmers, back heaters, security alarms. They were woven into the fabric of Viking sleep, sometimes literally, as you'd find more than one tangled in the blankets by morning. And not the pampered fluff balls we think of today, either. These were working animals, sheepdogs, mousers, hunters who earned their keep, but were still beloved. Fun fringe fact, Viking dogs were often given names, sometimes the same ones given to people. Names like Snarter, Scully, or Garm. Some dogs even had ceremonial collars, or were buried with their owners. And when it came to sleep, these animals weren't kicked to the corner. They were tucked in like anyone else. In colder regions, it wasn't just tolerated, it was encouraged. Let the dog under the blanket. Let the cat into your arms. Their body heat could mean the difference between a stiff morning and a frostbitten toe. But this wasn't just about temperature. There's something primal, something deeply ancestral about sleeping beside animals. Their breathing patterns, their warmth, their subtle movements through the night. These things anchor the nervous system. Studies today show that co-sleeping with pets can lower heart rate, reduce anxiety, and improve sleep depth. The Vikings knew this intuitively. You didn't need a white noise machine when a contented dog was snoring at your side. And for children, it was even more essential. A child curled up between their parents, a cat purring against their chest, the muffled cluck of a sleepy hen across the room. These were lullabies. These were signals of safety, of routine, of belonging. You might think a rooster crowing at dawn would be annoying, but for a Viking child, it meant the night had passed safely. It meant the world was still turning. That's comfort, feathered and noisy though it may be. Some scholars argue that not every household brought animals in at night, that this was more common in colder climates or poorer homes. Wealthier families might have had detached stables or more formal divisions, but even in those cases, pets, dogs, and cats remained close always. They weren't just tolerated, they were cherished. And then there's the spiritual layer. In Norse mythology, animals weren't just beasts of burden. They were sacred. Cats were sacred to Freya, the goddess of love, fertility, and yes, domestic life. Her chariot was pulled by two massive felines, and women often kept cats as companions and protectors. Dogs were associated with Garm, the hound of hell, and were seen as guides and guardians in both life and death. Sharing your bed with them wasn't just practical, it was symbolic. It meant protection, loyalty, and connection to the gods. Even cows and goats carried symbolic weight. Their milk, their strength, their constancy, all part of the household's survival. So, when a cow moved softly in the middle of the night, no one cursed. It was part of the chorus. The night had its own music, embers popping, breath sinking, animals murmuring, wind brushing the walls. It wasn't a sterile sleep environment. It was alive. And there's something else, something quieter. Sleeping with animals reminded the Vikings that they were part of nature, not outside it. You weren't sealed off from the wild. You were tangled up in it, cooperating with it, trusting it. You might have just come home from a raid or a hunt or a long, bitter day in the fields. But by nightfall, you were lying in shared heat with a goat that would provide milk tomorrow, or a dog who'd guard your children while you slept. That's not mess, that's relationship. You shift now in your bedding. There's a bit of straw under your arm, a paw near your leg, a distant bleat from the livestock side. You smile. Sleep is close. You feel the heat of bodies all around you. Some human, some not. You're breathing the same air, dreaming under the same roof, resting in a rhythm that feels older than language. And when you finally close your eyes, it's not just your family that drifts into sleep beside you. It's every soul in the house. 4 legs, 2 legs, whiskers, feathers, hooves, all wrapped together under a timber roof that creaks just slightly as the night deepens. Next, we'll lift our eyes to the sky because not all sleep is peaceful, even in the longhouse. Some nights are restless, some dreams are wild, and many Vikings believed it had something to do with the moon. Let's explore how lunar phases shaped their nights, their fears, and their sleep. Tonight, the sky is silver. A full moon hangs just above the roofline of the longhouse, bold and unblinking, casting its glow across the snow-packed earth outside. Even through the smoke holes and cracks in the thatch, its light manages to find you. Cool on your cheek, soft on your brow. You stir beneath the furs, not fully awake, but not quite asleep either. Something about the moon does that. Always has. And in the Viking world, you're not the only one feeling it. Lunar cycles weren't just pretty background in the Norse world. They were powerful, mysterious, and deeply woven into daily and nightly rhythms. The moon told time, it whispered fate, and it could absolutely mess with your sleep. Tonight, everyone feels it. A few people are tossing in their bedding. The dog near your feet gives a restless sigh. The livestock are oddly quiet. No one says it out loud, but the mood is different. The moon is watching, and Vikings knew better than to ignore its stare. The Norse didn't just observe the moon. They named it, honored it, even deified it. The moon was personified as the god Mani, brother to Sol, the sun goddess. Each night, Mani raced across the sky in his chariot, pursued by the great wolf Hati. If Hati ever caught him, the world would fall into darkness. That chase was eternal. But the moon's phases, full, waning, new, were reminders that even gods had cycles. And so did humans. There's a reason Old Norse calendars were lunar. Months were tracked by the moon. Farming schedules, raiding windows, and feast days were planned with one eye on the sky. But more than that, the moon was believed to tug at the soul just as it tugged at the tides. When the moon was full, dreams became strange. Tempers flared. Children couldn't sleep. Animals grew restless. And yes, warriors sometimes took it as a sign. It was time to move, fight, or change course. So, if you're lying awake right now, staring up at a shaft of moonlight that's crept through the wall slats, you're not alone. The others might not be speaking, but they feel it too. There's a certain tension in the air, not danger, just an alertness. The world feels thinner. Dreams run deeper. You're not just waiting for sleep. You're waiting to see what the moon might do next. Here's a wild fringe fact. Archaeological digs have uncovered ancient Norse artifacts with lunar symbols, spirals, crescents, full circle motifs. Some were worn as amulets, others embedded into household items like combs and drinking horns. It's believed these weren't just decorative, they were protective. Because the moon didn't just rule over sleep, it ruled over madness too. Yes, even the word lunacy has roots in lunar superstition, and the Vikings, like many ancient cultures, believed the full moon could stir something primal in people. A man who shouted in his sleep or thrashed during dreams wasn't just having a rough night. He might be moon-touched. A child who cried too long under a full moon could be seen as sensitive to spiritual forces. Not cursed exactly, but open. And the line between spiritual and physical wasn't drawn the way we draw it now. The body reacted to the moon, and the soul followed. Nights of the full moon were thought to thin the veil between realms, between the living and the dead, between gods and mortals, between the seen and unseen. That's why rituals were often held on moonlight nights. Offerings left at thresholds, songs sung in soft voices, doors bolted a little tighter. But the moon wasn't feared, not entirely. It was also revered, especially by women who tracked their own cycles by its phases, who timed births and ceremonies to its rhythms. The moon gave structure to life, even when it made sleep a little slippery. Some households even embraced the restlessness. A full moon meant extra time around the fire, stories told longer, laughter a little louder. You couldn't sleep? Fine. That meant more time to live. And in that strange middle ground between rest and wakefulness, the best dreams often came. You'd lie still, heart thudding gently, unsure if you were drifting or rising. And then you'd see something. A mountain with eyes. A river that whispered your name. A god who stepped down from the stars to speak a sentence you'd forget by morning. You'd wake sweating or smiling or both. That's the moon. That's what it does. Modern science is finally catching up. Studies suggest that the full moon can indeed alter sleep patterns, reducing deep sleep, delaying REM cycles, and causing people to wake more often. The theories range from evolutionary holdovers to biological light sensitivity. But the conclusion is clear. The moon does something, and the Vikings, they knew, not from studies, but from centuries of watching, feeling, dreaming under its glow. So tonight, you're half awake, bathed in silver light. The room is quiet, but not entirely still. Someone sighs across the hall. The dog stands, stretches, and then settles again. You wonder if you should sit up, speak, share the strange dream still lingering behind your eyes. But instead, you lie back, letting the moonlight trace your face, and you accept it for what it is. Not a disturbance, but a visitation. Eventually, sleep returns slowly, quietly. The moon watches as your breath evens out and your body releases the last bit of tension. You may dream again, you may not, but you've shared a night with Mani, and that alone makes it sacred. In the next section, we'll turn to a more tender topic: how love and intimacy shaped Viking nights. Because sleep wasn't always solitary, and under those furs, warmth came in more ways than one. The fire is low, just a cluster of glowing embers tucked into the center of the longhouse floor. The heavy breathing of the sleeping fills the air, punctuated by the soft creak of wood, the occasional rustle of blankets, and a gentle sigh from someone shifting in their sleep. But under one of those fur piles, two people are still awake. Their bodies pressed close, their voices barely more than breath. In the Viking world, sleep and intimacy weren't separate experiences. They shared the same space, the same bed, and often the same rhythm. And here, in the flickering dark, warmth comes from more than just firelight. We tend to imagine Viking life as hard-edged, cold seas, brutal battles, icy stairs. But that's only half the picture. These were also people who knew how to be tender, who understood the body, not just as a tool for war or labor, but as something to be cherished. And when the day's work was done, and night crept in like a blanket, touch wasn't just allowed. It was vital. There's no privacy curtain, no separate room. But intimacy wasn't exactly a secret either. In a longhouse where entire families slept within a few yards of each other, couples found their own quiet, invisible ways to be close. A shift in the blankets, a hand brushed over hip or shoulder, a whispered word in the dark. The Viking world made space for this, not just as pleasure, but as connection, as comfort, as human necessity. Marriage in Viking society was often practical, tied to property, alliances, and clan survival. But that doesn't mean it lacked affection. Many couples grew close, and some sagas even speak of deep abiding love. Husbands and wives who stayed by each other's sides through battles, famines, and long winters. And in the quiet hours of the night, they curled around each other, not just for heat, but for the grounding reminder: you are not alone in this world. And it wasn't always marriage either. Norse culture made room for different kinds of partnerships: lovers, hand-fasting arrangements, widows and widowers who found companionship again. It wasn't all rigid structures and moral policing. Vikings were pragmatic. If it kept people warm, bonded, and emotionally sane during a 7-month winter, it was probably fine. And here's a fringe fact that might surprise you. Sleeping together was sometimes written into contracts, literally. In some surviving marriage documents, clauses include language about sharing the bed and blanket, making physical closeness part of the deal. It wasn't about scandal or secrecy. It was about honesty. This was a world that acknowledged bodies and needs and didn't tiptoe around them. You're lying there now, half awake, half asleep, someone's breath on the back of your neck, a leg draped lightly over yours. The blanket traps the shared heat. But there's something even warmer about the weight of another body, the security of touch. You're not whispering epic poems or declaring eternal devotion. You're just present, and that's enough. Intimacy also softened the rough edges of the day. After the ache of fieldwork or the tension of a looming journey, these private moments were release valves, a way to say, "We made it through another day." There's nothing dramatic here. No candles, no elaborate seduction, just a slow shift in the dark. Two people reaching for each other, with the kind of instinct that doesn't need explanation. And if a child stirred nearby, or an elder rolled over with a sigh, so be it. You'd pause or not. It was a different kind of modesty based less on hiding and more on mutual respect. People knew how to give each other space even when they shared the same square footage. You didn't need walls to carve out a moment of intimacy. You just needed understanding. Scholars often debate how affectionate Norse culture truly was. Some point to the harshness of the landscape, the toughness of the people, the blunt pragmatism of marriage contracts. Others highlight the tenderness preserved in poetry, love poems carved into runestones, or the quiet scenes tucked into sagas where one person waits for another by the hearth or refuses to remarry after a partner's death. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Vikings weren't sentimental, but they weren't cold. They were human, navigating love and lust and comfort with the same rough-hewn elegance they brought to everything else. And for those without partners, the longhouse still offered connection. You might lie next to a sibling, a friend, or a companion animal. You might hold a child or be held by an elder. Physical closeness wasn't always sexual, and it didn't need to be. The intimacy of Viking sleep wasn't about a single type of relationship. It was about presence. You knew who was near. You felt them breathe. You rested better because you weren't alone. The Norse even had gods and goddesses devoted to love and connection. Freya, who ruled over beauty and fertility, was revered as much for her sensual power as her spiritual strength. She was called upon not just for matchmaking, but for real, grounded, lived love, the kind that blossomed in firelight and endured through cold nights. You pull the furs tighter now. A hand finds yours under the blanket. No words are exchanged. They don't need to be. The world outside may be vast and brutal, but here in this soft shared space, you are tethered, rooted, warm, not just in body, but in spirit. You'll sleep deeper because of it, not just because the bed is warm or the fire is still glowing, but because the presence beside you quiets your mind. You've got someone. They've got you. You sleep worth dreaming in. And in the next section, we'll turn the blanket over to the shadows, 'cause not every Viking night was peaceful. Some sleep was broken by fear, by spirits, by the tension of an enemy's presence. Let's explore what kept these dreamers awake and what they did to fight it off. Tonight is different. The air feels heavier somehow, as if the longhouse is holding its breath. The fire crackles, but it doesn't comfort you the way it usually does. Your furs are warm, your body is tired, but sleep doesn't come easy. You shift, you listen. The wood creaks overhead just once. A goat lets out a breathy snort. And still you can't settle. Something's off. And you're not alone in feeling it. Because as peaceful as Viking nights could be, not all sleep was safe. Some nights were haunted by fears, spirits, enemies, and thoughts that refused to quiet. Even the toughest Norse warriors had nights where rest felt just out of reach. It wasn't weakness. It was the reality of living in a world where danger wasn't metaphorical. It was real, physical, and always nearby. You could lock your door, bank your fire, and still feel a chill settle under your skin that had nothing to do with cold. Call it instinct. Call it the old fear. Either way, some nights you lay awake wondering if someone might come in the dark. Let's start with the enemies you could see. Feuds were a serious part of Norse society. Grudges could last generations. A wronged cousin, a rival farmer, a former ally turned bitter. Any one of them might come creeping toward your longhouse under cover of night, armed and angry. Violence wasn't always dramatic or loud. Sometimes it came quietly with a blade and a grudge slipping through a barely latched door. So you slept lightly, ears tuned for sound. You positioned your axe within reach. You made sure someone stayed awake on rotation just in case. And then there were the spirits. Vikings didn't believe the world ended at the edges of the firelight. Beyond that warm ring, the world was alive with gods, yes, but also with things older and darker. The Draugr, for instance, undead beings who rose from their graves to walk again. Not just rotting corpses, but twisted echoes of people who had unfinished business or died badly. You'd hear tales around the fire of a man buried with silver coins who came knocking a week later, eyes black, mouth open. You didn't want to dream of him. You didn't want to see him. So, households did what they could to ward off those things. Charms were hung above beds, iron blades placed at the threshold, runes carved into beams, bits of bone or protective herbs like mugwort or juniper tucked under pillows. And if a family suspected they'd offended a spirit or ancestor, a small offering might be left at the edge of the property. Bread, mead, a whispered apology. It wasn't superstition, it was negotiation. Fringe fact, some longhouses were deliberately built without direct lines to certain burial mounds or sacred groves. Orientation mattered. Doorways were angled. Entrances turned away from old paths where ghosts were said to walk. You weren't just building to stay warm. You were building to stay unseen by things you didn't want visiting. But not every fear came from the supernatural. Sometimes it was your own thoughts that kept you up. Memories, worries, regret. Did you say the wrong thing at the feast? Did you offend your neighbor? Is your son ready for his first voyage? Will the weather hold through the next harvest? These weren't idle concerns. They could spiral into waking dreams, half-sleeping episodes, where the mind wandered down roads the body couldn't follow. That's when people turned to each other, whispered conversations in the dark, the hand reaching out, a low voice saying, "Still awake." Shared insomnia wasn't unusual. In fact, it was expected. And in that middle-of-the-night honesty, bonds deepened. It wasn't about fixing anything. It was about being heard. And if you were alone in your restlessness, that's when the rituals kicked in. Some sat by the fire and stirred the coals, thinking of ancestors. Others chewed calming herbs or recited protective chants. A few simply stepped outside into the cold, let the night wind hit their face, and waited for the weight to lift. The cold grounded them. The stars reminded them they were part of something bigger. And then eventually they returned inside, stepped over sleeping forms, and lay down again. If not to sleep, then at least to rest. Even the gods didn't sleep perfectly. Odin, ever restless, sacrificed an eye for wisdom, and often wandered in disguise, sleepless and searching. His dreams were not always peaceful. He dreamed of war, of Ragnarok, of futures he couldn't prevent. If the old father himself didn't always find comfort in the dark, what chance did a humble farmer or sailor have? That knowledge strangely comforted people. Even the gods struggle. Even they paced the long halls at night. Modern scholars sometimes question just how common these fears were. Were the Vikings really afraid of ghosts? Did they truly believe in restless dead? Or were these just stories meant to keep kids from wandering too far at night? It's hard to say, but when you look at how often these ideas appear in burial customs, house design, family sagas, it's clear that night held meaning beyond sleep. It was watched, and so were you. You turn now, eyes closed, trying again. The sounds of the longhouse are familiar. Breathing fire, maybe a whisper, maybe the soft click of an animal shifting. You remind yourself that the door is barred, that your kin are near, that you've placed the charm above your bed just in case. You breathe slower. You let the thoughts quiet one by one. Sleep won't always come quickly, but it comes. It always comes. And when it does, it carries you away past the ghosts and the grudges into a realm where none of it can touch you. And in the next section, we'll climb aboard the dragon-proud ships and feel what it was like to sleep on the sea. Because yes, Vikings slept on boats while rocking through storms and dodging rocks. And somehow they made that rest count too. The sea rocks you like a cradle with calloused hands. One moment you're rising, cradled by the gentle roll of a wave. The next you're dropping fast into a trough, your stomach following half a second behind. It's not peaceful, it's not quiet, but it is familiar. You're wrapped in your wool cloak, spine pressed against the curved hull of a Viking longship, head tilted toward the stars. You're trying to sleep, surrounded by men who smell like salt, sweat, and smoked fish, and somehow you might just pull it off. Sleeping at sea wasn't a luxurious affair. It was rough, cramped, and exposed. You had no cabin, no bunk, no feather pillow to sink into. Viking ships weren't designed for comfort. They were floating muscle, all lean wood and raw nerve, long and narrow with no below-deck chamber. They demanded that you sleep under the sky, or not at all. And you did because sleep was essential, even if the sky was spitting rain and the boat creaked like an old man's knees. The key, as with so much in Viking life, was adaptation. You learned how to fold your cloak just right to keep out the spray. You figured out which parts of the ship moved the least. You shared body heat with the man beside you, whether you liked him or not, and you slept in shifts because someone always had to watch the sea, the wind, and the horizon, just in case it decided to bite back. But let's back up a second. These weren't little Sunday sailboats. A typical Viking longship could stretch up to 70 feet, with a crew of 30 to 60 men, each with their own oar, their own pack, and their own exhaustion. When the oars weren't needed, say during a long drift across a glassy fjord or a calm night under sail, those men took turns resting, collapsed between the ribs of the ship like sacks of barley. There were no beds, of course. You made do with what you had. Maybe a straw-filled sack if you were lucky, or a dry patch of sailcloth. You curled up wherever the deck let you. Sometimes on your side, other times flat on your back, hands folded across your chest like a man preparing for burial. The stars overhead reminded you of exactly how small your ship was on this endless black ocean. And sometimes that was oddly comforting. One fringe fact for you: Vikings didn't just sleep on ships, they sometimes slept in them permanently. When a chieftain or important figure died, their ship could become their grave. Literally buried on land with treasures, weapons, and even sacrificed animals or slaves. These ship burials were both tombs and time capsules. The idea was simple. The ship carried you through life, and it would carry you into the next world too. Hopefully, after some solid celestial shut-eye. But while you're still alive and trying to rest mid-journey, the experience is different. The sea is never silent. Water slaps against the hull, ropes creak. A sail flaps once violently. Someone near you coughs or mutters in their sleep. Another man is on watch, humming a tune you almost recognize. He's tired too, but he's upright, eyes on the dark. His job is to keep you alive while you drift somewhere between dream and alertness. And the rocking motion, for some, it's soothing. For others, it's nausea in wave form. But with time, your body adjusts. The sway becomes a lullaby. You learn to time your breathing with the motion of the ship to lean into the rhythm instead of fighting it. It's not the deepest sleep you've ever had, but it's enough. The kind of half-sleep that warriors master. One eye open, muscles still coiled, but mind just loose enough to recharge. Scholars have debated how well the Norsemen actually slept at sea. Some argue they were too uncomfortable to rest much at all, especially during high seas crossings with relentless winds and violent swells. Others point out that these were seasoned sailors, boys raised near fjords, used to balancing on boats before they were tall enough to swing a sword. To them, the deck was home. The sea was lullaby, not threat. And while there were no hammocks, some ingenuity helped. Large wool cloaks doubled as weatherproof wraps. Shields laid flat could offer protection from wind. Oars could be arranged to lean against for makeshift support. And when the boat anchored near shore or in calm harbors, you could sleep more soundly. Your only worry the snoring of the man beside you or the curious eyes of a seal bobbing nearby. Of course, you weren't always resting during peaceful voyages. Some journeys were stressful, dangerous. You slept when you had to, not when you wanted. During raids or coastal landings, rest came in fast, brutal increments. A 10-minute nap before you had to row. A stolen hour after the first watch ended, and when you finally reached land again, feet unsteady on soil, you collapsed beside the fire and slept like someone who had earned it 3 times over. You turn now on your makeshift bedding. A knot in the deck presses into your ribs, but you ignore it. The stars are still there. So is the man on watch. And so is the knowledge that this ship, no matter how exposed it feels, has carried you through everything. Storms, hunger, even boredom. If you can sleep here, you can sleep anywhere. And soon you do. It's not deep. It's not pretty, but it's real. The kind of sleep that matters because it keeps you alive, keeps you sane, reminds you that even warriors, even explorers, need to close their eyes sometimes and just drift. And that next we'll take a look at what happened when someone couldn't sleep, because every night someone had to stay up and watch. Whether it was the sea, the longhouse, or the edge of the woods, the night watch was a sacred duty. And surprisingly, it didn't ruin their rest. It enhanced it. You're awake, and it's your turn. The fire's down to its last golden bones, and most of the longhouse is deep in sleep, breathing slow, bundled under thick furs, arms flung over children, or tucked tight around stomachs. Even the goats have quieted, but not you. You're on night watch, a role so ancient it feels like instinct. Your eyes adjust to the dark. Your ears tune into every creak, every sigh, every crunch of frost beyond the wall. Everyone else is dreaming. You're the one keeping the world from slipping in. Night watch wasn't punishment. It wasn't some sleep-depriving penance. It was honor, responsibility. In Viking life, someone always had to hold the line between safety and the unknown. And that line was never thinner than in the small hours. When firelight dims and dreams run strange, whether at sea, in camp, or deep in a longhouse tucked against the forest, the job was the same. Stay awake, stay alert, let everyone else sleep knowing you were there. In a longhouse, this might mean simply sitting upright by the fire, feeding it now and then, listening for wolves or footsteps or a bad change in the wind. It meant watching the door, scanning the rafters for embers threatening to leap from the hearth and catch the roof. It meant glancing over the sleeping forms around you, your brother, your mother, your wife, your dog, and reminding yourself that they trusted you to see this through. No snoozing, no dozing, just you and the dark, nodding politely to each other. At sea, the duty was harder. No fire to tend, just the slap of the water and the hiss of the wind. Your eyes had to watch for shifting stars, for the telltale swell of land on the horizon, for approaching sails that didn't belong. Sometimes you stood alone, sometimes with one other. But either way, you knew this moment mattered. And here's the surprising part. The Vikings didn't see this as a sleep sacrifice. They didn't believe pulling a night watch ruined you. They structured their sleep around it. Rest came in phases, biphasic or polyphasic patterns that gave everyone the sleep they needed in pieces instead of all at once. You might sleep hard from sunset to midnight, then rise for a shift, then sleep again until dawn, or grab 4 hours here, 2 there. Viking life wasn't built around 8 continuous hours. It was built around balance. Fringe fact: modern sleep researchers have studied segmented sleep, especially in pre-industrial cultures, and discovered it was often the norm. People slept in chunks. They even liked it. Waking between cycles wasn't considered a problem. It was a time for prayer, quiet tasks, conversation, or reflection. The first sleep and second sleep were phrases that would have made perfect sense in a Norse village. Your night watch might fall right between those two. You shift your weight on the bench now, stretching your legs. A log on the fire shifts and splits with a soft crack. You glance toward it, toss on a small branch, and feel the warmth bloom again. The people closest to the hearth murmur in their sleep, drawn toward the comfort. You smile quietly. This is your kingdom for now. Just a few more hours. And night watch wasn't always lonely. Sometimes it was social. 2 people would take the shift together, speaking in hushed tones, sharing stories, planning, teasing, remembering. These were the intimate hours when the rest of the world slept. You found a kind of intimate honesty in each other. You could speak of fears you wouldn't admit in daylight. You could confess. You could dream out loud. But the night watch could also be spiritual. Some believed the veil between worlds was thinner then, that the gods wandered, or that the dead whispered through the cold. You weren't just guarding the door from people. You were guarding it from whatever else might be traveling through the dark. A strange noise outside wasn't just an animal. It might be a spirit or a sign, and you were there to see it first. To help yourself stay awake, you might chew bitter herbs or rub your legs to keep the blood moving. You might walk a circle inside the house, stepping carefully between sleepers, or pace the edge of the camp just beyond the firelight, feeling the cold sharpen your thoughts. Sleep tugged at you, sure, but the job mattered more. And when your watch ended, when the next soul stirred and rose, rubbing eyes and reaching for their cloak, you passed the torch, literally or metaphorically. You nodded to them, you lay down. And here's the beautiful part. You didn't collapse in exhaustion. You welcomed sleep. It came fast, thick, like a reward. It was because you'd earned it, not just with muscle, but with presence. Some scholars speculate that this pattern of sleeping in shifts, of integrating wakefulness into the night, may have contributed to Viking resilience. While other societies feared the dark, the Norse lived in it. They weren't afraid of a broken night. They used it. You glance around now. The others are still sleeping. The child has rolled halfway out of their bedding, and you gently tuck them back in. The dog near the door stirs, raises its head, then settles again, reassured by your presence. And the wind outside, it's rising. You note the change. You'll tell the others at breakfast. But for now, you simply watch. Your shift is almost over. Soon, someone else will rise and take your place, and you'll finally close your eyes, muscles relaxing all at once, sleep rushing in like a tide. You'll rest easy because tonight you held the night back just long enough for the others to dream in peace. Next, we'll wrap up our journey by stepping back and asking, what have we learned? What did the Vikings do right that we've forgotten? And how can we bring it back? From firelight to fur, from night watch to lunar dreams, let's take their ancient lessons into our modern nights. Morning creeps in slowly, like someone opening a curtain, just a crack. It's not a sunrise in the grand cinematic sense. No glowing orchestral burst, but a soft shift. The embers in the hearth have dulled to a dusty red. Somewhere beyond the longhouse, a rooster calls hoarse and impatient. You stretch beneath the fur, warm in body, heavy in limb, and something inside you already misses the dream you just left. But today is here. And even as the Viking world stirs awake, it's worth pausing and asking, what exactly did they get so right about sleep? Let's face it, these people lived in a world that by all modern accounts should have made sleep impossible. Cold air, hard floors, loud rooms, looming enemies, weird mushrooms, fire hazard in every direction, no blackout curtains, no lavender diffusers, and yet they slept deeply, collectively. Well, how? To start with that, the obvious. Their relationship to rhythm. Vikings didn't fight nature's clock. They flowed with it. Sunrise, sunset, long days in summer, long nights in winter. They didn't obsess over fitting their rest into rigid 8-hour chunks. They let sleep come in waves, 2 shifts at night, a nap by the fire, even a snooze on the deck of a rocking ship. They didn't shame themselves for mid-watch drowsiness or midday tiredness. They understood that energy was a resource to be managed, not dominated. Then there's the environment. Imagine your modern bedroom. climate-controlled, sealed tight, filled with LED indicators and buzzing electronics. Now, picture the longhouse. Open air circulation, cold enough to trigger a drop in core temperature, which science now tells us helps with deep sleep. And darkness that was actual darkness, not a faint glow from the neighbor's porch light. Their nights were built for restoration. They weren't fighting off light pollution. Their sleep space, shared and natural, was tuned to biology, not convenience. And let's not overlook the materials. Fur, wool, feather, straw. These weren't design choices. They were survival strategies, but they also happened to be ideal for temperature regulation. Natural fibers breathe. They trap heat, but don't suffocate. They're heavy enough to offer that satisfying blanket weight pressure modern sleep therapists now call grounding. You think your weighted blanket is cool? Try a 6-layer fox fur pelt with a side of goat breath. Then comes the community element. This one's a game changer. The Vikings didn't sleep alone. Not in design, not in practice. Children, elders, animals, warriors, all piled into the same warm, breathing living space. Safety in numbers, literally. That soft chorus of other people's sleep, their breathing, their snoring, their murmurs, wasn't a disruption. It was reassurance. Your nervous system relaxed because it knew you were surrounded. Alone, you were vulnerable. Together, you could finally let go. And touch constant. Not necessarily romantic, though that was part of it. But touch as a human right. A dog across your feet, a sibling curled beside you, a partner's hand under yours. It wasn't weird. It was woven in. Modern sleep doctors now preach about the benefits of physical closeness, lowered cortisol, deeper REM cycles, improved mood. The Vikings didn't need white papers. They just practiced it. But it's more than physical. Their attitude towards sleep was healthier. They didn't treat it like a chore. They didn't feel guilty about needing it. They respected it, honored it. Even dreams were believed to be messages, visions, warnings. Sleep wasn't downtime. It was a conversation with the gods, your ancestors, your own buried instincts. If you woke with a strange vision in your head, people listened. You didn't roll over and ignore it. You told someone. You made meaning. Even fear had its place. Those long haunted nights weren't failures of the sleep cycle. They were part of the landscape. If you didn't sleep well one night, it wasn't because you lacked discipline or drank caffeine too late. It was because the world was stirring. Maybe spirits were near. Maybe you needed to stand watch or process something or just sit with the discomfort. Not all sleep is peaceful. The Vikings knew that. They built rituals around it instead of pretending it shouldn't happen. Now, sure, there were downsides. They got sick. They froze. A bad winter could mean weeks of tight, smoky air. Their bodies hurt more. Their bedding wore thin. But sleep wasn't treated like some personal problem to solve with apps and gadgets. It was a shared experience. Something you navigated as a group, as a household, as a people. And the craziest part, so much of what they did is coming back. Cold sleep trends, weighted blankets, biphasic rest cycles, dream journaling, soundscapes, saunas, shared sleep. These new ideas, the Vikings were rocking them 1,000 years ago with zero lab studies and a very loose understanding of REM cycles. So, what can you borrow from them? For starters, dim the lights early. Let your body ease into sleep like they did. Skip the phone. Use fire or at least something warm and flickering. Get cold, but keep the bedding warm. Use natural fibers. Sleep near someone or something if you can. Pet your dog. Let your cat claim your rib cage. Don't fight waking up at 3 a.m. Use it. Reflect. Guard your people. Then go back to bed. Treat sleep like something sacred. Not fragile, not performative, just real, messy, rhythmic, shared, and deeply important. Let your body feel the dark. Let your brain tell stories. Let your ancestors, if they want, whisper something weird through your dreams. And finally, remember this. Vikings didn't sleep like warriors because they were trying to be brave. They slept like that because they had to. The world was too rough, too wild, too uncertain to go without rest. They knew rest was a kind of readiness. They didn't chase perfect nights. They built good ones. One ember, one fur, one steady breath at a time. So maybe tonight, as you settle into your own bed, you'll think of them. Of the longhouse, of the fire, of the snow pressing softly against the outside wall, of the dog curled at your feet, of the moon peeking through the rafters. And you'll breathe a little deeper, sleep a little easier, dream a little wilder, because deep down you know what they knew. A good night's sleep is a shield, and some of the strongest warriors are the ones who know when to let go. So here you are, back in your own room. No longhouse creaking, no fire crackling, no goat trying to climb into your lap. Just the hum of the fan, the soft glow of a lamp you should have turned off 10 minutes ago, and maybe the faint rustle of a city beyond your walls. The Vikings are far behind you now, but somehow their sleep lingers, not in fur pelts or war axes, but in the rhythm, the quiet, the way they made space for rest, even when the world refused to slow down. You're probably not sleeping on straw, but you can close your laptop earlier. Dim the lights. Skip the doom scroll. Find the right kind of heavy blanket. Let your body remember what deep rest feels like. The Vikings didn't need sleep aids. They were the sleep aid. The warmth of kin, the hiss of steam, the lull of cold air on bare skin, the permission to wake at night and just sit with it. They made sleep human again. Not a performance, not a competition, just natural. And hey, if you wake tonight, heart racing for no reason, brain replaying something from 6 years ago, remember the night watch. It's okay to be the one awake, to listen, to breathe, to keep the fire. Because the truth is, the best sleep isn't about silence or softness or thread count. It's about safety, warmth, trust, a body at ease, a mind allowed to wander, and a space, whether ship, longhouse, or bedroom, built to hold you while you dream.